Hey everyone, let's just dive right into it. In today's explainer, we're unpacking a really fascinating analysis by Jim Palmer. Now, for years, Palmer was your quintessential megachurch pastor. I mean, he had the microphone, the massive platform, the polish, and this aura of just absolute certainty. But then, he walked away. He realized he could no longer teach the doctrine with a clear conscience, basically noticing that the institutional machine wasn't actually transforming lives in a healthy, liberating way. So today we're going to dig into his psychological breakdown of how institutional religion literally shapes the human nervous system, and more importantly, how we can reclaim our own inner compass. It's this incredible bridge between theology and mental health, so let's get into it. Here's a quick roadmap for our explainer today. We're covering the machine of toxic religion, deconstructing authority and texts, the psychology of belief, the shadow and institutional traps, and finally, reclaiming your inner compass.
Which brings us to this massive turning point for Palmer. He puts it like this: I finally hit a wall, I left. The system rewards you for not noticing what it is doing to you. Think about that for a second. Palmer argues that when you're inside a systemic religious structure, you don't just agree with a story, you're living inside of it. And the institution itself actually survives by keeping you completely unaware of the psychological toll it's taking on you. He ended up walking away from his entire platform just to find some genuine psychological honesty.
All right, Section 1, the machine of toxic religion and understanding systemic control. So Palmer argues that toxic religion operates a lot like a casino that runs entirely on desperation. And the process goes a little something like this. Step 1 starts with fear, specifically the absolute dread of the afterlife and divine rejection. Hell is used as the ultimate leverage, right? Believe correctly or suffer literally forever. And that bleeds right into Step 2, chronic psychological surveillance. Fear-based religion actually rewires your nervous system. People start policing their own thoughts, their doubts, their basic emotions, all through this terrifying lens of divine judgment, which unfortunately leads us straight to Step 3, the loss of true conscience. When you are constantly operating out of conditioned pure fear, Palmer notes you completely lose the ability to tell the difference between your own genuine inner conscience and just the sheer terror of stepping out of line. Moving right along to Section 2, deconstructing authority and texts, separating the message from the institution. Okay, so let's look at institutional authority for a minute. Palmer realized that clergy titles, pastor, bishop, apostle, they hold zero inherent divine rank. They're basically brands. They are costumes and social contracts designed to demand obedience. He points out something so simple but profound. If a person's authority completely vanishes the exact moment you stop believing in it, well, it was never actual authority in the first place. It was just conditioned obedience. Now, contrast that with true authority. True authority is all about psychological independence and actually trusting your own inner discernment. The problem is, institutional religion actively trains people into dependency, making them distrust their own minds unless someone with a fancy title validates them. And this total shift in how we view authority directly impacts how we read sacred texts too. For Palmer, the word myth gets completely redefined. He doesn't see ancient texts as literal historical journalism or some rigid legal transcript. Instead, he views them as poetic meaning-making. The original authors were using myth, parable, and legend to capture these massive, enduring human struggles, things like suffering, transformation, betrayal, and meaning. Palmer argues that when we force these ancient, deeply symbolic narratives to act as literal, factual history, we're actually destroying their existential and psychological depth. I absolutely love this next point he makes. When someone says, my authority is the Bible, what they usually mean is, my authority is what I was taught the Bible means. People inherit these massive assumptions, like treating the text as a perfectly cohesive rulebook, and they just treat those assumptions as cold, hard facts. But Palmer reminds us, and this is absolutely crucial, every single interpretation is inevitably filtered through human consciousness, cultural biases, and institutional influence. There is literally no reading of any text that hasn't first been filtered through a human mind. Okay, Section 3, the psychology of belief, why we believe what we believe. Let's think about the actual mechanics of belief for a second. A massive, overwhelming portion of it is simply inherited conditioning. We're talking geography, family, culture. Palmer asserts that religion is, for the most part, just geography plus conditioning. If you happen to be born in one part of the world, you're likely Hindu. In another, you're Muslim. Somewhere else, Christian. Most people inherit their entire foundational religious story long before their brain has even developed the basic capacity to form a dissenting thought. Only a tiny, tiny fraction represents actual critical evaluation. And honestly, recognizing that should bring a ton of humility to how we view our own absolute certainties. And you really see this inherited anxiety spill over into religious practices, especially prayer. Palmer notes that prayer so often functions like a celestial vending machine. Insert good behavior, extract desired outcome. It becomes this desperate tool for anxiety management, just full of bargaining, begging, and trying to regulate all the terrifying uncertainty of life by negotiating with an imaginary tyrant. But he contrasts this with prayer as presence. A healthier psychological goal isn't about trying to persuade the universe to give you exactly what you want. It's about learning to stay grounded and totally present in reality, even when reality is really hard, without collapsing.
Palmer also throws out this incredibly provocative idea. Your God is often your values in heaven, your tribalism wearing a halo. He's suggesting that a whole lot of what we call God talk is actually just straight-up psychological projection. It's self-validation. People conveniently imagine a deity who just so happens to agree perfectly with their politics, their social hierarchy, their prejudices, and their morals. Divine certainty, when you look at it that way, is really just a cosmic ego boost. That takes us to Section 4, the shadow and institutional traps, the hidden cost of suppression. Palmer introduces this really interesting psychological concept called the shadow, which is basically the parts of ourselves we completely refuse to face. Well, those unexamined emotions, they don't just disappear. They go underground and mutate into toxic religious behaviors. For instance, suppressed fear turns into this fierce outward judgment of other people. Unprocessed shame? That becomes rigid, exhausting moralism. And deep-seated insecurity masquerades as spiritual superiority. And the really wild part is, because religious environments so often reward outward performance and actively discourage true psychological honesty, these toxic manifestations are frequently praised. They're seen as deep devotion. Now, Palmer is super impartial here, which is great. He points out that ideology is a fundamentally human problem, not just a religious one. Being more religious doesn't automatically save you. Sometimes it literally just hands you divine language to justify your own cruelty. But, and this is key, swinging to the exact opposite extreme, like strict secularism or being aggressively anti-religion, doesn't magically save you either. That can easily become its own dogmatic religion, complete with its own purity cultures and public shaming. The real root problem across the entire board, it's the unintegrated human ego. It's our greed, our fear, and our desire for dominance, regardless of whatever cultural outfit it happens to be wearing at the time. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Reclaiming Your Inner Compass, the path to psychological wholeness. First things first, we've got to completely redefine what maturity actually looks like. The institution's definition of maturity is, frankly, entirely self-serving. It's all about attendance, tithing, volunteering, and keeping the institution at the absolute center of your entire life. But Palmer views true spiritual life as totally decentralized. It happens in the messiness of everyday life. Real transformation occurs in honest conversations with friends, in kitchens during times of intense grief, in therapy, in the messy moments of parenting, and just out in nature. Once the institution loses its monopoly on your growth, life itself becomes the teacher. And to navigate that life, Palmer insists you already possess a profound inner toolkit. You have critical thinking, you have empathy, reason, conscience, and intuition. You do not need a spiritual babysitter. You are entirely capable of leading your own journey from the inside out. Now, the goal here isn't some radical, selfish individualism. Actually, it's about restoring your ability to consciously participate in your own being, rather than just surrendering your humanity to a system that demands blind obedience. This all builds to what I think is the most profound assertion from Palmer in this whole analysis. Real spiritual growth demands building integrity strong enough to tolerate the truth, even when it destabilizes your identity and community. Wow. The true spiritual journey doesn't start with absolute certainty. In fact, it starts exactly where certainty ends. It requires looking at reality and even our own mortality straight in the face without relying on a fantasy to do all your emotional heavy lifting for you. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful ultimatum from Palmer's analysis. Do you want inherited answers, or do you want an honest life? Choosing honesty comes with a real cost, for sure. You might lose a community, a comfortable identity, or that warm illusion of cosmic safety. But what it gives back to you is your own mind, your freedom, your psychological wholeness, and the ability to be fully, authentically alive. It's an amazing question to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking, keep asking those tough questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.